All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Mr. Kenton for physical science. And we are continuing our discussion and our topic of looking at bonding. And now we're going to get into something that's very important is naming and formula writing. And just think of it as a way to be able to effectively speak chemistry to other people, right? And you think about it, everything has a specific name. Within chemistry. So it's not, hey, just hand me that compound over there, hand me that stuff. We want to be specific about the things. And so what we're going to be looking at now until the end of this unit is looking at what are the rules, what are the processes that chemists use in order to name and identify substances. And so this is going to be very important in being able to communicate about further topics. Like if you want to know about chemical reactions, well, we need to understand something about how to properly name and write formulas for substances. Now, we're going to start with naming compounds, specifically ionic compounds. And if you remember, we've already talked about how ionic substances, they tend to contain metals and nonmetals. They have a cation and an anion, and they transfer electrons from the cation to the anion. And so when it comes to naming ionic compounds, there are some specific rules that we need to keep in mind so as we go through and name something that we make sure that we're adhering to. So let's take a look at those rules. The first thing that we need to keep in mind is that when you're given your name and you've identified it as an ionic compound, the first thing we want to do is we want to write the names of both of the elements that are listed and making sure that we write the name of the positive ion first. Now, the good news is when you're given a chemical name, if it's ionic, the positive ion is already going to be listed first in the name. Okay, so that's our first task. We're going to write the names of both of our elements, making sure that the positive ion comes first. That's step one. Step two is after writing the names, we are going to need to make some changes. So the negative ion, or typically the second component, the second element in your compound, we're going to need to change the ending of that ion from its original name to IDE, right? And so that could be things like chlorine would become chloride. Oxygen would become oxide. Bromine would become bromide. Nitrogen would become nitride. Carbon would become carbide. Okay, so we're going to change the ending of our negative ion to IDE. That's always going to be the case. Now, in the event that your ionic compound contains a polyatomic ion, what you're going to do is you're going to simply just write the name of the polyatomic ion in place of the positive or negative ion. So let's say, for example, let's say that the negative ion in that formula is a polyatomic ion. Well, there would be no need to change the negative ion's ending to IDE. We would simply just write the name of that polyatomic ion in place of that positive or negative ion. Okay? And so that, ladies and gentlemen, those are the three rules that we need to keep in mind when we're given a formula and we're asked to write the name. And so with this particular topic, I think it's best to kind of see this worked out and looking at examples. So over the next couple slides, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk you through how would we go through and name these compounds based on the formulas using these steps. Okay, so hopefully you're ready for that. All right, so example number one, we've got NABR. Okay, and if that's our first example, we're going to keep our steps in mind. So the first step is we need to write the names of both elements first. Well, in order to do that, it might be helpful first for us to just kind of identify. Notice that there's going to be a split. we want to split the positive and negative ions in half. So there's the Na portion and the Br portion. This is where having a periodic table is going to be extremely beneficial. So we're going to write the names of both the elements. Now, in the formula, we see NaBr, we have a metal and a non-metal, so we know this is ionic. So we're going to say, okay, Na, that's sodium, and then we have Br, which is bromine, right? So that was our first step. We simply wrote the names of both of the elements with the positive ion coming first. So we have sodium bromine. That's step one. All right. Step two, we need to change the negative ions ending to IDE. Well, the negative ion is the Br, so that means the bromine. Now notice that it ends in INE currently. We're going to change that INE to IDE. So if we rewrite this now, this is now sodium bromide. Okay, and so we changed the negative ions ending to IDE. And then for our third step, we write the names of polyatomic ions in place of the positive or negative ion. Well, in this case, we don't have a polyatomic ion. And so then the correct name for NaBr would be sodium bromide. That would be the correct name for this particular compound. Okay, so we'd be done. We wouldn't have to do that third step. Okay. Let's take a look at another example. All right, this one's a little bit different, but again, we're going to follow the same process. We want to split this into our positive and negative ion. And so, but one thing we notice here in this particular chemical formula is that there are 3 atoms. And because there are 3 atoms, that's going to let me know, and it should let you guys know, hey, I've got a polyatomic ion in this compound, right? Now, if we split this, we're going to split it where it's the sodium and then this CO3 portion. So we're going to write the names of both of the elements, the positive ion first. Now, like I said, we got more than 2 elements, so we know that we have to have a polyatomic ion. So we're going to check that list that's in your reference sheet. You also wrote it down in your notes. You're going to check that list and you're going to find CO3. You're going to see that CO3 is carbonate. So then when we write this, we're going to start off by simply stating that this is sodium carbonate. Okay. Now it says change the negative ions ending to I. This is where we have to make a distinction. Since this is a polyatomic ion, since the negative ion carbonate is polyatomic, if I can spell, is polyatomic, we're actually going to skip step number 2 because we're dealing with a polyatomic. So in this case, we skip this step only because we have a polyatomic. And for that, we just simply write the names of the polyatomic ions in place of our positive or negative ions. So then our final answer here would simply be sodium carbonate, right? That would be the name of the chemical compound for Na2CO3. All right, so we've done one that didn't have a polyatomic ion. We've done one that does have a polyatomic ion. So far, so good. All right, last example, then we'll be done with the video. We've got Li2O. So again, first thing first, we want to write the name of the positive ion first, both elements. But first we want to split, figure out which ones, like what are our elements here. And so this is going to be a split down here. We've got our Li, we've got O. So we check the periodic table. We look at that, we say, all right, Li, that's element number 3, that's lithium. So I've got lithium, and then O is oxygen, so I'm going to write lithium, oxygen. Right. Now, step 2, since we only have 2 atoms, we don't have any polyatomic ions, so then for our second element, the oxygen, we're going to need to change its ending to IDE. Now in oxygen, we're going to change the GEN portion to that IDE. So when we do that, we're going to end up with lithium oxide. I guess to be more specific, we changed the Y to, because it's not oxide, it's just oxide. No polyatomic ions, so we don't have to worry about that. The last little note that I want to mention is notice that in each of these names that, in the sodium bromide example, there were no subscripts, but that didn't impact the name. In the previous example, we had Na2CO3. That subscript of 2 on the sodium didn't impact its name. And even here, for Li2O, we had 2 lithiums, but that subscript of 2 didn't impact the name, right? So if we're dealing with something that is an ionic compound, so it contains that metal and nonmetal, or cation and anion, the subscript does not affect the name of that compound. All right. So lithium oxide, that's the name of this compound. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you would go from an ionic chemical formula to an ionic name. All right. I hope this video has been helpful. Hope it's been insightful. Don't forget that we do have the practice that are on Google Classroom. So once you've watched this video, I certainly recommend go look at those practice. You've been given chemical formulas, write the names for them. Make sure you get that turned in so I can provide you with some feedback and help you kind of identify areas where you might be struggling. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Take care.